The winter wind clawed through the valley with a bitterness that felt personal, as if the night itself bore a grudge against the living. Snow drifted in heavy sheets across the earth, swallowing the trail that wound between the hills, erasing all evidence of travelers who had dared to pass. The world was silent except for the groaning of the pines and the faint rattle of an old wagon making its way toward nowhere. Inside that wagon, beneath a torn canvas cover, huddled a boy no older than 12. His clothes were thin, his shoes worn through, and his breath puffed in pale clouds that faded as quickly as they appeared. He had no name anyone cared to remember. To the ranchers who passed him by, he was simply the orphan. He had learned long ago that names were fragile things, easily stripped away. His parents had been gone since he was small fever taking his mother, a mining accident swallowing his father. For years, the boy drifted like a shadow between camps and towns, surviving on scraps, sleeping beneath porches, learning to disappear when the wrong kind of men grew curious. No one claimed him, and so he belonged to no one. But hunger and cold have a way of breaking down pride. And on this particular night, he knew he could not make it through until morning alone. At the edge of the valley, firelight flickered against the snow, a heartbeat of warmth in the vast white silence. The boy crept closer, his bare hands shaking, the tips of his fingers numb and nearly blackened. A circle of riders sat around the blaze, native warriors, their ponies tethered nearby, their shadows tall and sharp against the snow. They were Comanche, the kind of men townsfolk warned their children about, whispering stories of raids and vengeance. But to the boy, shivering and close to collapse, they were not monsters. They were warmth. They were survival. He lingered at the edge of the firelight, his body swaying, until one of the warriors spotted him. A bowstring creaked, an arrow drawn, the tip glinting fire red. The boy lifted his hands slowly, though he barely had the strength to keep them raised. The warriors murmured among themselves, their words sharp and swift. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward. His hair was braided with bone beads, his eyes like flint catching sparks. He studied the boy as one might study a half-dead animal, uncertain whether to offer mercy or a swift end. The boy's voice cracked when he finally found the strength to speak. "Please," he whispered, "just the fire, just a little warmth." The tall warrior's expression did not soften, but after a long moment, he lowered his hand and signaled the others. The arrow was eased back into its quiver. The boy stumbled forward, collapsing near the flames. He stretched his trembling hands toward the heat, wincing as the blood returned to his fingers in painful stabs. For a time, no one spoke. The warriors watched him with unreadable eyes, their language a river he could not wade into. He was an outsider, a ghost intruding on their circle. When the boy finally drifted sideways and slumped against the frozen ground, one of the younger warriors, no older than 16, tossed something across the fire. It landed on the boy's chest with a heavy thud, a blanket. Woven wool, rough but thick, smelling of smoke and horse. He clutched it instinctively, dragging it around his shoulders, burying his face in the coarse fabric. It was more kindness than he had known in months, perhaps years. By dawn, the storm had eased. The boy awoke, still wrapped in the blanket, though the warrior who had given it to him was gone, riding with the others across the white hills. Only hoofprints marked their passing. The boy sat there for a long while, staring at the horizon, where they had disappeared. Something shifted in his chest, something he couldn't name. Not hope, not yet, but the fragile beginnings of belonging. That same day, as the sun reached its highest point, the boy stumbled into the settlement that clung to the river bend. The town was small, built of weathered wood and stubborn pride. Smoke curled from chimneys, and children's laughter drifted faintly from the schoolhouse. To anyone else, it was a place of safety. To the boy, it was another place where doors might slam in his face. The sheriff's office stood near the center, its porch swept clean of snow. The boy collapsed on its steps, still clutching the blanket. Hours passed before anyone noticed him. When the sheriff finally emerged, pipe clenched between his teeth, he frowned down at the sight of a ragged child half buried in frost. "Good Lord, boy," he muttered, crouching beside him. "You look half dead." Night fell over the ranch, stars dotting the sky like pinpricks in black velvet. Sam stayed by the fire, listening to the creak of the house and the distant calls of nocturnal predators. He barely slept, knowing that outside the fragile safety of the cabin, danger was moving. Men could be tracking the elder, men who saw Apache lives as collateral or prey. The wind whispered warnings through the cracks in the wooden walls, and every shadow cast by the fire seemed to twist into threatening shapes. Yet the elder rested, unaware or perhaps trusting enough to surrender his vigilance to someone else for a few precious hours. Just as the first tendrils of dawn crept over the horizon, Sam heard the faint crunch of hooves approaching. His heart skipped a beat. Visitors at this hour never brought good news. From the rising sun, a young deputy appeared, riding at a pace that suggested urgency and fear in equal measure. Sam's hand instinctively went to the rifle, though his mind raced faster than his pulse. "Sam, Sheriff wants to see you," the deputy panted, his eyes flicking nervously toward the house. "Says it's important." Sam's throat went dry. The sheriff rarely summoned anyone without cause, and under these circumstances, it could mean trouble for both him and the man he had saved. He nodded slowly, helping the deputy dismount. "Is he hurt?" he asked quietly, nodding toward the elder. The deputy's gaze softened, but carried a weight of warning. "No, but Sam, you need to know. Sheriff Donnelly, he doesn't take kindly to harboring anyone like him. You could be in serious trouble." The deputy's voice faltered. Sam's jaw tightened. He had understood the risk from the beginning, but now it seemed tangible, pressing down on him like the heat of the summer sun. He nodded to the young man. "I understand." Then, casting one last glance at the elder, Sam steeled himself for what was coming. When the elder stirred later that morning, his dark eyes brightened with cautious awareness. He gestured toward the distant hills and then at Sam, as if to say the message was clear. Trust was earned, but danger was already moving. Sam felt a chill despite the morning warmth. Somewhere beyond the horizon, men with authority and malice in equal measure were moving. They would not see this as simple mercy. They would see it as interference, a challenge to their control. He could feel the storm approaching, the tension in the air like static before a thunderclap. Sam prepared for the coming confrontation with a steady, deliberate calm. He checked his firearms, secured the doors and windows, and positioned himself so that he could see any approach from multiple angles. The elder, though fragile, watched him with a quiet intensity, as if measuring his resolve. Sam realized that this man, who had been nearly lost to the desert, carried more than wounds on his body. He carried a history that was about to collide with the present, a history that would draw danger directly to Sam's doorstep. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, but it was a weight he would bear without hesitation. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the prairie, Sam knew the sheriff and his men would arrive soon. The tension was electric, a charged silence that hung between the trees and the open plains. He could hear every bird, every rustle, every distant noise amplified against the stillness. Somewhere out there, justice or vengeance was coming, and the line between the two would blur the moment it crossed onto his land. The elder shifted slightly, and Sam understood a truth he had always known in his bones. To protect someone in need was to invite danger, yet to do otherwise was to betray oneself entirely. By midday, the air on the plains had grown heavy, as though the sun itself carried the weight of what was coming. Sam could see the first hints of movement on the horizon. Dust swirling along the trails, the telltale rhythm of hooves cutting through the otherwise still morning. He knew the sheriff was coming, but even at this distance something felt off. The men weren't riding with the casual purpose of lawmen executing routine duties. Their pace, the precision of their approach, suggested hunters tracking prey. The elder stirred beside him, sitting up slowly, his dark eyes scanning the distant ridge with quiet calculation. Sam realized then that the man had survived worse than this, worse than a few armed men intent on enforcing their own version of justice. The riders crested the hill in a cloud of dust, 3 figures framed against the blazing sky. The man in the lead wore the badge of the sheriff, but there was something in his posture. in the tilt of his hat and the way he held his reins, that radiated menace rather than authority. Sam's instinct screamed caution. "Stay back," he murmured to the elder, who nodded, his expression calm but unreadable. There was a grace in his movements, a restraint born of knowing that panic would serve no purpose here. As the riders drew closer, Sam could see the hard lines of their faces, the sunburned skin and eyes narrowed with intent. They were not here to reason. The sheriff dismounted first, boots crunching deliberately on the dry earth. He scanned the ranch with a predator's precision, his gaze landing on Sam, then the elder, and then returning to the horizon as if measuring every potential threat. "Mr. Hawthorne," he called, voice carrying across the open plain. Smooth and controlled, but threaded with danger. "We've had reports of a fugitive being harbored on your property. I suggest you cooperate." Sam's hand rested lightly on the rifle but remained calm. "This is my land," he replied steadily. "I see no warrants. You have no right to enter uninvited." The sheriff's lips curved into a thin, cold smile. "Rights, Mr. Hawthorne. Sometimes rights are negotiable when justice is delayed." Sam's gaze shifted to the elder. The man's eyes flicked toward the approaching figures, assessing, calculating. He spoke softly, words again unintelligible to Sam, but the tone was unmistakable, a warning and a reassurance rolled into one. Sam understood enough to know that the elder had been tracked before, that these men were part of something larger, something patient, ruthless. Every second of delay now risked their lives, and yet confrontation seemed inevitable. The elder shifted slightly, revealing the jagged line along his shoulder where Sam had tended the wound, and a flicker of acknowledgement passed between them. Survival depended on readiness, not hope. The two men flanking the sheriff dismounted next, weapons drawn but not raised, signaling readiness rather than immediate hostility. Sam could see the practiced ease with which they handled their firearms, the kind of ease born of countless confrontations, countless lives taken, and threats neutralized. The tension on the ranch thickened, a palpable weight pressing against the walls of the house and even the thin air itself. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, every sound sharper. The elder's gaze never wavered, calm and steady as if he alone knew the path through the storm. The sheriff took another step forward, the gravel crunching under his boots like a warning. "I know he's here," he said, voice low but cutting. "I don't care who's protecting him. This ends today." Sam's pulse quickened, but his voice was steady. "I protect those in need. That's my choice. You may leave now before this escalates." The sheriff's eyes flicked toward the elder and back to Sam, a faint sneer tracing the line of his jaw. "Noble sentiment. Dangerous sentiment. I admire it. Until it costs lives." He took another step, and the heat of confrontation flared in the air between them. A sudden movement caught Sam's eye. The elder had risen, leaning slightly on Sam for support, but his stance was deliberate, ready. There was no panic in his actions, only calculated awareness. The sheriff's hand drifted toward his holster, and instinctively Sam mirrored him, the rifle aimed low but ready. The tension stretched to a breaking point, and for a moment, it seemed the wind itself had paused, waiting for the first shot. Dust swirled around their boots, and the quiet hum of cicadas filled the charged silence. Then the elder spoke, his voice low but cutting through the heat of tension like steel. Sam didn't understand the words, but the sheriff's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition passing over his features. Something about the presence, the authority, and the history in the man's posture made it clear he was no ordinary target. The sheriff's confidence faltered for the first time, uncertainty creeping into the lines of his face. The other two men tensed visibly, as though aware that the next move could ignite violence beyond their calculations. The elder gestured toward the hills, a subtle motion that Sam realized was meant to draw attention to an unseen detail: another rider, emerging slowly, deliberately. The fourth figure appeared like a shadow given form, dark coat blending with the lines of the ridge, horse moving silently but with purpose. The sheriff's confident smile flickered as he noticed the newcomer. For the first time, he was forced to measure his own power against something he did not fully understand. The newcomer dismounted with smooth, deliberate grace, and Sam felt a chill run through him. This was no ally. This was someone who carried authority born of experience and consequence. The man's eyes were silvered with age and resolve, lines etched by countless hard decisions. His gaze swept the scene, and even the sheriff instinctively stepped back. "I thought I made myself clear about handling this quietly," he said, voice steady, weighty. The sheriff's tone faltered, a faint edge of fear creeping in as he realized that the situation was no longer under his control. The elder, still standing beside Sam, met the newcomer's eyes and inclined his head slightly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Sam understood then that the balance of power had shifted. The air crackled as words were exchanged, accusations and warnings mixing with the tension of unspoken threats. The sheriff tried to assert control, to remind everyone present of his authority, but the presence of the men in black made it clear that the law, as wielded by the sheriff, was fragile here. Sam's heart pounded, but his resolve hardened. This land, these lives, could not be surrendered to the whim of a man whose justice was blind and cruel. Every second that passed brought them closer to a moment where action or misstep would define survival. The confrontation teetered on the edge, silence stretching like a taut wire. Sam and the elder stood ready, the sheriff flanked by men whose confidence had dimmed but not disappeared. The fourth rider, older and commanding, watched them all with the patience of someone who had seen too much to be fooled by posturing. The plains seemed to hold their breath, the distant hills framing a scene where every glance, every twitch of a hand, could tip the balance toward life or death. The tension on the plains was almost unbearable as the fourth rider, older and deliberate, stepped forward. Sam felt the heat of expectation settle into his chest like a stone. The sheriff, once confident, now stood rigid, glancing from the elder to Sam, then to the newcomer, his bravado faltering. Every man present seemed to understand that this was no ordinary confrontation. This was not merely about law or justice. It was about survival, honor, and the reckoning that came when the wronged refused to be ignored. The elder's eyes, dark and steady, locked with the newcomer's. A subtle nod passed between them, a silent agreement that Sam did not need to fully understand, only to trust. The sheriff's hand twitched near his holster, a reflex born of habit rather than courage, and the younger deputies mirrored him, tension coiled in every muscle. Sam's hand rested on his rifle, yet he felt the same careful control that the elder carried. Every heartbeat stretched, measured, until it seemed the very air would shatter under the weight of anticipation. Then the elder spoke in his language, slow and deliberate. The sheriff's eyes widened, and the faint smirk that had haunted his face vanished. The words carried authority, history, and warning all at once. The deputies shifted uneasily, and Sam realized that whatever the elder said, it transcended law, commanding respect that could not be ignored. It was as if the desert itself lent weight to his voice, grounding it in something older than titles or badges. The sheriff tried to counter, to reassert control, but every word felt hollow against the presence of the elder and the calm certainty of the fourth rider. The man in black finally spoke, voice low but resonant. "You've overstepped," he said. "This land, these people, are not yours to threaten." The sheriff bristled but faltered under the intensity of the gaze. Even the deputies hesitated, sensing that the situation had shifted beyond the ordinary. Sam felt a surge of relief, but he remained cautious. In moments like this, danger lingered in every shadow. The elder leaned slightly, supporting himself against Sam, but his stance was resolute. He was no longer a man merely in need of protection, he was a force, a reckoning for anyone who would pursue him with malice. The sheriff tried once more, stepping forward, voice raised. "You can't interfere with the law. That man," he gestured toward the elder, "is wanted." The man in black's gaze hardened, silvered eyes glinting with something older than fear. "Wanted by whom?" he asked. "By men who think they can take what isn't theirs. By men who confuse power with right. Not by justice, not by honor." The sheriff faltered, realizing that he was no longer the one dictating terms. His men shifted, tension rippling through their movements, their confidence beginning to crumble. A sudden movement broke the frozen silence. The elder, steady and deliberate, stepped fully into the clearing. He raised his hand, and the younger deputies instinctively paused. There was an authority in his presence, an unspoken command that rippled across the plains. The sheriff's hand hovered over his weapon, but the older man in black simply stood, unyielding, silent, a presence that seemed to warp the very air around him. Sam understood then that the confrontation had already been decided, not by force, but by recognition. The elder, with his history and quiet power, was untouchable. The sheriff's confidence finally shattered. He took a step back, uncertainty etching his features. "This isn't over," he spat, voice tight, but it lacked conviction. The man in black's eyes did not waver. "It is," he said simply. "Leave this place. Take your men. Return to the lawless justice you thought you commanded, and do not return." The sheriff's gaze flicked toward the elder, as if measuring whether defiance could survive. But the elder did not move, did not flinch. He simply met the gaze of the sheriff with unbroken resolve. The younger deputies dropped their hands from their weapons, tension draining as they realized the fight was no longer theirs to wage. The sheriff finally nodded stiffly, a gesture more of survival than surrender. His men mounted their horses, dust rising in their wake as they retreated across the plains. The sound of hooves faded, leaving the ranch in a tense, relieved silence. Sam lowered his rifle slowly, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The elder straightened, pain etched on his face, but his eyes were sharp, unwavering. For a moment, the vast plains seemed to exhale with them, the tension dissipating into the wind and dust. Sam approached, careful, reverent even, and offered his hand. The elder accepted it, their grip firm and unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Words were unnecessary. Trust, courage, and the unyielding determination to do what was right had carried them through. The man who had been wounded, hunted, and betrayed now stood tall, a testament to resilience, history, and the unbreakable bond forged in moments of crisis. Sam understood that he had been a participant in something far greater than any legal battle. He had been part of a story of survival, respect, and honor. By evening, the ranch had returned to a fragile calm. The elder sat near the fire, tending to his wound with Sam's careful guidance, but there was a strength in his demeanor that had not been there before. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised reds and purples, and the vast silence of the plains felt less threatening, almost sacred. Sam sat beside him, the bond between them solidified in shared danger and trust. Neither spoke much, for words were not necessary to convey the gravity of what had transpired. They had faced threats, intimidation, and violence together, and had emerged intact, not just as survivors, but as witnesses to the strength that honor and courage could command. Night settled over the ranch like a protective shroud. Sam kept a quiet watch, but the fear that had once clawed at his chest was tempered by the knowledge that they had faced the storm and endured. The elder, finally resting fully, exhaled in quiet relief. Sam looked out over the plains, aware that danger could return, that the world beyond this ranch would always carry threats. Yet he also knew something deeper. Protection, courage, and humanity mattered even when the cost was high. The lesson, hard-earned, lingered in the night air with each whisper of wind and the distant call of nocturnal creatures. The sheriff's presence had vanished, but the memory remained a reminder that justice and authority were not always aligned, and that courage often came at the cost of personal risk. Sam realized that he had not only saved a life, but had safeguarded a fragment of history, a living testament to resilience, culture, and endurance. He felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that the plains were wide and threats would always roam them, but that some truths honor, loyalty, protection could never be undermined. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Sam and the elder stood together, surveying the plains that stretched endlessly before them. Survival was no longer about merely enduring. It was about standing firm when others sought to impose fear, about protecting the vulnerable against the unjust, and about recognizing that courage was as much in restraint and calculation as in action. In that vast, open space, both men understood a deeper truth. The choices they made mattered far beyond the moments they occupied, rippling outward in ways both seen and unseen. The story of courage, honor, and standing against injustice reminds us that protecting those in need often requires strength, empathy, and unwavering resolve. Share this story with others, and remember that real heroism lies in the choices we make when no one is watching. Stand for what is right, protect the vulnerable, and never underestimate the power of courage in the face of danger.